And I'll just go.
It's recording now.
Yeah, so I'm just.
East Arizona birding. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, I think I could. Let me see if I can make this full screen. There we go. Okay, everybody seeing that pretty well? If the
Yeah, I
yes,
see it. Yep.
okay, and I'll. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this, Karen and Brian. I guess I should introduce myself a bit first. I'm a retired family physician. Everybody think, oh yeah, part of the problem. But anyways, I like birding better than doctoring these days, I guess. I've been very interested in birding for about 25 years and birded in several places all around the world. So usually as part of a holiday, I haven't really been one to go on special birding tours or these festivals to any great degree. So I heard about the Tucson Southeast Arizona Festival, saw something about it, looked into it, and it looked interesting. And I'll have to say something that really caught my attention was hummingbirds.
Doug, could we just get you to put it into the slideshow mode?
Oh, okay, I think it is.
Because we're seeing your slides on the air. So if you have on your taskbar, there should be, yeah. So we get it full screen, your slide.
How's that look?
We're still seeing the slides on the side. I'm not sure. In their view, does it give you slideshow in the view?
What are you seeing now? I know, okay, I'll log in again.
There we go, good.
Okay, maybe I'll just leave it like that and not touch anything. And yes, I'd heard about it, but yeah, people say you go into Tucson in August, but it turned out to be a very good festival, and I thought it'd be worth sharing some of the details about it. So let's see how we move on here. Okay, so my brother joined me. I think he signed in here. He lives in San Diego, California, so for him it was a drive east to get. We met in Tucson, and there us in the lobby, and I was looking at this picture. There's two birds that we didn't see yet: the elegant trogon in the top, and the Montezuma quail in the bottom. So we'll have to get back there. There's some details of the festival itself, or the club. Is that cut off at the top for you like it is for me? Maybe I can move that taskbar down. Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay. So it's the Tucson, the Audubon Society. I know it's a national Audubon Society, but there's also local ones, and they're not necessarily connected. But anyways, the Tucson Audubon Society has over 3,000 members and an annual budget of $3 million. I looked into that. They get about $1 million in grants, $1 million in memberships and donations, and then another $1 million in various things, sales through their gift shop and some of the profit from this festival. So they're quite a very big operation. Besides the festival, they offer, I've seen on their website, 150 non-festival field trips each year in the Tucson area. So the birding festival itself had over 750 people registered. There's 100 volunteers, or more than 100 volunteers, so very big volunteer base. There's 40 exhibitors, 22 sponsors. There was a total of 96 field trips, and the field trips are really varied. They're available really for all abilities or disabilities, any birding experience, focusing on photography or focusing on certain very rare species. There's full day field trips, half day field trips, evening field trips. They go into many different habitats. And they're not just birds as well, even though it's called the birding festival. Some of the field trips are definitely focused on non-birding animals and even botany as well. Okay, just trying to advance this somehow. There we go. Just some pictures inside the festival itself. The volunteers all had their identifying T-shirts and lanyards, and there was some nice displays from some of those top names, Swarovski, Zeiss, those optic companies. And one good thing is they would let you borrow some of their equipment for the day. And one day I borrowed a beautiful pair of Swarovski binoculars and didn't get hooked enough to buy them, but they're sure nice to use. So one reason to go to Tucson is that it's their monsoon, or what they call their monsoon season, in July and August. At this time, they get a lot of thunderstorms or rain that comes in somehow. And it's even quite different from Arizona or from Phoenix. Here's a picture of clouds developing looking north out of Tucson towards Mount Lemmon, and that's someplace we birded later, but this is a pretty typical picture in July and August in Tucson. And here's just some, don't want to get too scientific, but here's some little dated but monthly precipitation for Phoenix. You can see April, May, and June is very dry, and the rest of the year they're lucky to get an inch a month. And here's the difference in Tucson, very dry in April, May, and June as well, but in July and August and even September, over 2 inches of rain a month, which doesn't sound like much, but as we saw later on a field trip, it doesn't take much to really activate desert wildlife. This is a picture from up on Mount Lemmon, looking back towards Tucson, again in an afternoon with a lot of cloud action around there. And the other thing about Tucson, and this has to do with the Sierra Madre Mountains, this map borrowed from Wikipedia, showing what they call the Madre, and that's named after the Sierra Madre pine oak woodlands. So the mountains in Mexico have a mixture of pine oak woodlands at most altitudes. But as you get up, as you see into southeast Arizona, the Sierra Madre kind of peters out, and the mountains become isolated, or what they call sky islands. So Sky Island is where you have a mountain, but surrounded by radically different ecosystem, which in this case would be sort of dry, flat desert between these isolated mountain areas. And so in these mountain areas in Mexico and then into Arizona, you get these very specific pine oak woodlands, which have a large number of birds and other wildlife associated with them. So in a way, in Tucson, it's like birding in Mexico without going to Mexico. And many of the birds, and almost most of the birds I'll be showing you in photos here, are often found only in this area of America anyways, and with most of their range into Mexico and Central America. This was for the festival, they put together all the eBird. Every field trip, the guide made an eBird report and included us in it if we're eBirders. So this just shows Tucson in the middle here under the larger area, up at the top Phoenix. And Tucson's really not that far from Phoenix, which is good because from Edmonton, you can't fly straight to Tucson, but you can go to Phoenix. The Sky Islands are more the lower part, right close to the Mexican border, and the upper areas are more the desert areas. So once my brother and I got settled in, we said, well, let's take a little walk. There's a large park across the street, not really full of birds, but one of the really eye-catching ones it had is the Vermilion flycatcher, which happens to be the mascot bird of the Tucson Audubon Society. You see two vermilion flycatchers in California and maybe Texas along the southwest states, but an extensive range going all the way down well into Central America. The males are, as you can see, an outstanding red. The females, I'll click to one here, are not fairly dull bird, a little bit of orange or buff on the sides. And the other bird we saw around there, we managed to find a Cooper's hawk hiding in a bush of this urban park. So the first day, we were on an all-day tour starting very early. And the first part of it, we went up to the Carr Canyon, which is on a specific mountain range very close to the Mexican border. And then in the same area, the Ash Canyon Bird Sanctuary. This is heading out at 5 in the morning, even before sunrise. We're heading basically southeast towards this area. Oh, even got a video there working. So this is on the Carr, going up the Carr Canyon Road. And I should have had a better picture, but you can see to the right center, that flat area, and then there's some more mountains in the distance. So here we are on one sky island. There's some flat desert in between, and then another sky island in the distance. And this is all rather high. Tucson itself, I think, is at a fairly good altitude, 600 meters or so. What we're looking at here at the desert is up around over 1,000 or meters high. And then going up this road, we ended up at least 7,000 feet and maybe higher. And it was a rough road too. So this first place we stopped, you can see the sun's just rising, our van to the left. We met up with some, we had a guide with us from the festival, and there also was a guide associated with the park or the natural area that this was. At this level, it's mostly oaks. These trees we're seeing are mostly the oaks of this habitat. A little higher up, we'll get some pines. So one of the first birds we saw was a sulfur-bellied flycatcher at the campground. Large size flycatcher, distinctive stripes and an eye stripe. And I'll show you this is a map of the range of the sulfur-bellied flycatcher. And you can see that it matches the extent of the Sierra Madre Mountains pretty much exactly. So this is a bird of that pine oak woodlands. Almost all of its range is in Mexico and Central America, and just that little bit that comes into southeast Arizona. And I won't show you the ranges of most of these other birds because they're all pretty much the same. Or if I say it has that typical southeast Arizona range, this is what I'm talking about. A canyon towhee, sort of in the towhee sparrow family, pretty dull bird, though shows a bit of color on the tail and the wings. Mexican jays, again, just found in this area of Arizona. Like a lot of corvids, keep together in family groups and noisy and get around. Acorn woodpeckers, pretty ubiquitous, and that's a bird you'll see also across the southwest. This one's on an oak tree. And some interesting things about the acorn woodpecker. They're quite colonial, sort of they're in groups. The year-old birds help raise the youngest ones, so they stick in family groups. When there are acorns available, they put them in what's called silo trees like this. They drill holes in the bark or the wood and then pound in these acorns and then feed on them in the other parts of the year. Turkey vultures are pretty ubiquitous around this area, like many places further south of us. And then further up at pretty much at the top of the road, we were at what's called the Reef Mine town site. So there used to be a mine here, there used to be a town. So it's a rather flat area, which made it nice considering we were at a quite high altitude here. And you can see the oak in the foreground, some pines in the background. So it's a very typical pine oak Madrian forest that we're looking at here. You can see the optics and the cameras, and we're probably looking at one of these birds. I'll show you a picture here. We had lunch up here too, and sort of walked around, and some not a lot of birds here, but considering the altitude and the habitat, you get some very specific species that we were looking for and did find them. This is looking up from where we were, and you can see there's not much in the way of trees even above this altitude. It becomes somewhat bushy. And I know in these Sky Islands have some different zones, and so that probably represents the change from one zone to another. Another picture of us birding around, and yeah, I think a very large pine tree on the side there. Okay, let's get to some birds. A paddock tanager was a bird we saw up there, which is obviously related to a summer tanager and those ones, but found in the southern states and down into far into Mexico, I believe. Yellow-eyed junco, very typical bird of this area, and you can see the ground cover itself is mostly pine needles and oak leaves. Not the greatest picture, but you can see, if you looked at that, around here, you might think it's a blue-headed vireo, but it's a closely related Plumbeus vireo. Plumbeus referring to its lead coloring. Typical white eye ring and white line going to the bill that the vireos have. And that's another picture kind of looking straight up at a Plumbeus, maybe the same one, maybe a different one. The Virginia's warbler is very typical warbler of this habitat as well, and found really only in a limited area of the Southwest, maybe not specifically Southeast Arizona, but around there, you'd have to be in this kind of habitat to see it. So we were happy to see that one. That was a good lifer. And another specific warbler in this habitat, the Grace's warbler, maybe even more, as it has a range much like we saw with the sulfur-bellied flycatcher, barely makes it into Arizona, and with the biggest extent of its range into Mexico. We're not the best picture. I'll have a better picture later at another, when we went up Mount Lemmon. And after that, we went back down and to the Ash Canyon Bird Sanctuary, and that was pretty much at the flat area in the desert. So it was more or less a desert bird sanctuary. But the feature here is hummingbirds. If you have this bird book, Hummingbirds of North America, written by Sherry Williamson, who's probably the expert in North American hummingbirds, Ash Canyon Bird Sanctuary is where she lives. It's her place. So you can expect we'll see something there. Show some pictures of what, so this is kind of the sanctuary itself. If you're in Tucson and you're thinking of going, you have to reserve a spot. They're very limited parking and maybe limited seating as well. So you can't just kind of show up and come in. It's kind of regulated. But you can see there's dozens of feeders, benches, and people would sit, watch the different feeders. And then every feeder is numbered. So if you're waiting for something particularly rare, like we were, you might say, plain-capped star-throat at number 6, or blue-throated mountain gem at number 5, and everybody take a look or run over. So some of the birds there were, some of them might be familiar to us, like calliope hummingbird, migrating. I think that would be a migrant down there. And another, I think that's a calliope. I know some of these hummingbirds are a little difficult. So if somebody can correct me on some of my identification, it would be welcome. But then some of the hummingbirds, like this broad-billed hummingbird, are really magnificent colors, and you really could spend a lot of time looking at these. The broad-billed specifically has this, the base of the bill, not always as much as this one, but reddish orange at the base of the bill, and contrasting with the blue, the dark and light blues. I really enjoyed photographing these hummingbirds, and there was enough natural perches that you could just wait for them to land on some of the natural vegetation rather than a picture on a feeder. I'll let you soak in some of these. Yeah, the females are, there's one more male on a feeder. It's a female, which look totally different. So a distinctive black eye stripe, and some of the orangish red at the base of the bill makes them identifiable. But like some other hummingbirds, the females aren't so spectacular. And this is probably a first year, a hatch year bird male that's just getting molting out of its sort of early juvenile feathers into the blue that it'll have as an adult male. Another female. It's a female broad-billed hummingbird, I think, and you can't see the red in the base of the bill from this view, but you can still see this kind of broadness at the base that gives it its name, and quite a square tail without much in the way of white spots or anything at the back end. The female has a little bit of light color at the end of its tail feathers. The male, it has none of that even. The other spectacular hummingbird, there was a Lucifer hummingbird. We only saw a couple males, but they have this markedly curved bill and a brilliant purple gorget that's outstanding. Very happy to see those and get some good photos. This is probably Anna's or a Rufus with those orange colors in the base of the tail, a female, just to show that view. This one you might not know what it is looking this way, but then when it turns its head, you can see the colors top and bottom. I think this is an Anna's hummingbird, sort of, which has a wider range up the West Coast, even into British Columbia as well. This is a black-chinned hummingbird, which is kind of a Western equivalent of the ruby-throated hummingbird, though we have them here. It's mostly a bird of the eastern continent. Black-chinned is more found in the western continent and rarely wanders into Alberta. Looks much like the ruby-throated. The head on the female like this, a little grayer, not as green as you might expect with a ruby-throated. And there's some slight difference in the length of the wings compared to the tail. I forget if it's one way or the other. It's another nice picture of, not even sure what this one is, but another juvenile showing one type to the other, maybe a Rufus or something, but with those sort of light colored fringes on the green feathers. And there was one hummingbird that we were sort of waiting to see. It had been reported there, and not even a regular there, called a plain cap starthroat. And it just showed up at the last, maybe just minutes before we had to leave, sort of fed for 30 seconds and took off again as I managed to. It's quite a large hummingbird, has a red throat, black and white stripes on the side of the face. And again, like other birds, rarely even in Southeast Arizona would be considered a rarity, and with almost all of its range into Mexico and Central America. An inevitable issue driving around there is border patrols and check stops looking for migrants, illegal migrants. So we had nothing to worry about, but it's an interesting wrinkle in Southeast Arizona. And then in the evening, we went to Sabino Canyon, which is a recreation area just north of Tucson, right on the edge of Tucson. And with the guides on this night, were particularly interested in scorpions. So we were leaving right around sunset, and particularly once it got a little darker, we'd be looking for scorpions with ultraviolet lights. And we are heading basically east, I believe, and we stayed on a fairly flat area. We're in the Sonoran Desert with saguaro cactuses around. And that's where I saw a roadrunner, my first roadrunner. So that was nice. As you see, the next evening we went to Sabino Canyon again, and there was a roadrunner running around the parking lot. So it didn't seem so special the second time. Another desert bird of that area, the rufous wing sparrow. Like our Vesper sparrow, has a little bit of a rufous at the front edge of the wing. It's nice to see those. Are generally only found in these desert areas. Some saguaros, choya cactus. Gila woodpecker. There's two kinds of woodpeckers down in that area, the Gila woodpecker and the ladder-backed woodpecker. And the woodpeckers have an important role for other birds in that they make nest holes in the saguaros. And then those nest holes are used by several other species, pretty much like our woodpeckers here in the aspens. Looking at some saguaros in the sunset. And you can see the taller one to the right probably has a bird nest hole in it. Some beautiful sunsets there with the saguaros silhouetted. Now I thought this is interesting. The range of the saguaro cactus is really just into Arizona and that part of Mexico. So, sort of iconic of the Southwest in some ways, it's actually quite a limited range. And they're very slow growing. Doing some reading, I found that a 10-year-old cactus, saguaro cactus, might be only 4 or 5 centimeters high. This saguaro here, that's probably about 2 meters high, is probably 50, 60 years old. And the way it's growing in that other tree is not an accident. Apparently they do grow better, or they'll germinate better with that sort of foster tree around them. The woodpeckers only make holes in them once they're about 15 meters high, and at the age where they're starting to get maybe some arms as well, which is probably not till they're well over 100 years old. So the large saguaros with many arms on them are over 100, even 125, 150 years old. And this is found in the Tucson Audubon website at one of their centers, serial photos of a saguaro there, which is interesting, showing the bottom 3 ends at, of course, 2023, and sort of slow growth of those arms even. The other cactus around there is a barrel cactus, just like this, and they're still blossoming at this time. And scorpions, we did find scorpions with the ultraviolet light. You find them quite easily. And the people with us, there actually were several species. The photo might look fierce, but I was a little surprised. They actually only about 1 inch long or 1.5 inches long at the most. Maybe there's some bigger species, but there are rather small arthropod, though, would still give you painful bite if you happen to get on the wrong side of them, or sting, I should say. We did see one snake on this tour, a king snake, which is fairly long. This one was at least a meter long. And then, so as it was getting dark, we were heading back, get ready for the next day's tour. So that day we started with a tour down to the Peña Blanca Canyon, again, right just a kilometer or two from the Mexican border. It was called a canyon, but it's actually quite a flat walk. You see we had a guide, a young fellow with us that had exceptional hearing. It was quite amazing what he could hear. They're looking, and here you see one fellow with us on this even had a walker, which wasn't, and it worked out quite well. He was able to get in and out of the van fairly easily and then use the walker. And this tour was fairly flat, gravel road, but fairly flat and easy to navigate. The van in the background is a nice Mercedes camper van. That wasn't the van of our tour. In fact, it was a van of this lady who had spent a night there with ultraviolet light and a white sheet and was looking at moths or collecting moths. There's a close-up of one of them. I think some kind of sphinx moth, but obviously she had numerous species, and by the time we were getting by, she was just letting the thrashers and lizards come and eat them off her sheet. A little better picture of a canyon towhee. You can see the colors on it somewhat better. At Peña Blanca, saw some lark sparrows there, which very striking sparrow with the black and white facial markings. We saw a lot of other birds there, but some, it's a good tour, though I say maybe didn't see a lot of special birds or life birds, but that evening, we went on another evening hike to Sabino Canyon with this fellow leading it. His name was Bob Ornstein. And his main interest was reptiles rather than birds. And there had been a little bit of rain, like a quarter inch or 5 or 6 millimeters of rain in this part of Tucson that afternoon. And he sort of predicted, he said, oh, we had a little bit of rain this afternoon. This might be a good evening for taking a walk, specifically for reptiles and desert toads and that kind of thing. It turned out he was quite right. So on this one, instead of heading along the flat like we did the evening before, we headed up this road, which is not an open road for traffic, and into the canyon proper and these hills. One thing we saw here was purple martins, but the purple martins in this area are a particular subspecies called Hesperia. They're a little smaller maybe than the ones we see here. The females are a little lighter, but one thing about them is they nest almost exclusively in the saguaro cactus, in the holes, nesting cavities made by the woodpeckers. And they don't nest colonially like other purple martins. They've tried to develop some nest houses, and this is one picture I got on the Audubon Society site of the winning entry in the purple martin nest house contest. I don't know how well it works, but the idea, you need something about the size or diameter of a large saguaro cactus, but then with a hole and just a cavity, a small cavity inside that would be just used by one pair of these specific subspecies of purple martins. And so these ones do their egg laying and in August, July and August, when there is the monsoon rains come, not any earlier in the spring. Another specific desert sparrow, the black-throated sparrow, saw on this trip. And snakes, we ended up seeing, I think, 8 different kinds of snakes. And Bob said that it's the most snakes he's seen on any field trip, and with the snakes and other things I'll show you here, he said it was the most successful Audubon Society evening field trip in the history of the society. So we lucked out. The other thing we saw was a Gila monster, this lizard, very typical of the desert, sluggish kind of thing. It moved around a bit, but even for our leader said that was only the second one he'd ever seen in his life. So we were very fortunate to find this one just off the road. Actually, a cyclist that was cycling there had seen it, and some people saw the bike and the guy off the road. They went to see if he was injured, and they found out no, he actually had stopped because he saw a Gila monster. So yeah, we ended up seeing at least 8 species of snake: the Gila monster, desert tortoise, the desert toads, and some other frogs, and tarantula and wolf spiders and scorpions. The non-birding evening walk that we did. The next day we went to Madeira Canyon and then the Santa Rita Lodge. So we started at sort of the base of this sky island in more almost what they call sort of a grasslands or a bushy grassland. There we are, just sunrise, the sun just hitting the mountains, looking west. One of the birds we saw there, the really pretty bird, a blue grosbeak. The front view you can see is just all blue, but on the back it shows some really beautiful red, yellow edges on the feathers. And also a zone-tailed hawk. Now, a zone-tailed hawk is a boodio hawk, but the thing about it, and if you read in Sibley, he said they look incredibly like turkey vultures. Maybe not up close, but up in the air, they soar like a turkey vulture, and they associate themselves with turkey vultures. And you can see the dark and light on the wing. They resemble turkey vultures in that way. And there's some speculation that maybe that's even a hunting technique. In a way, they camouflage themselves in groups of turkey vultures and surprise their prey somehow. I think that might be just speculation, but they do, except for the white bar across the tail and the lack of a red head. But when you see, so down there, if you see turkey vultures in the air, it's worth looking at them, because one of a group might well be a zone-tailed hawk. There's the other woodpecker of the area, the ladder-backed woodpecker, so-called because of the ladder-like stripes going up its back. And then we went on to the Santa Rita Lodge. So this is somewhat like the Ash Canyon Bird Sanctuary, a place with a small parking lot, lots of feeders, and but this one was in the mountains, so a little different habitat. We're getting the birds of the sky islands of the mountain areas, not the desert birds. There were some hummingbirds here, and there was one particular one that we were looking for, and we're lucky to see. This is not that particular one. This is more of the broad-billed. You can see with the orange base on the bill. This is probably sort of a first year or year-old male, looking kind of scruffy. Here's a female, looking funny when they sit. They can have that squat shape that hummingbirds get that looks so totally different than they do when they're flying. Another broad-billed at a flower. So that you can see this probably male, broad-billed, and on the tails totally black without any light edges on the tail feathers like the female has. This is one we came to see, and again, we're lucky to see it. It came maybe just once, what's called a Rivoli's hummingbird. It was up to a few years ago called the magnificent hummingbird, but then that species was split. And I think there still is the magnificent hummingbird with its range entirely in Mexico. And then this one is called the Rivoli's. So as we heard with name changes, that name's probably not going to last long. Quite a large hummingbird. You sort of compare it to the feeder, a very large bill, very, very dark hummingbird, quite spectacular. That's not a really sharp picture, but the bird up sitting in the shade, and you can see a little more of the green neck compared to the rest of the black. But what was even more special at the Santa Rita Lodge was the other birds at the feeders. There are some pretty fascinating ones. Another hepatic tanager, Mexican jay. Get some nice close-up looks at that. If that one, if his bill looks a little truncated, it's because it's in the shade. More acorn woodpeckers, and obviously they'll eat anything else besides acorns like other woodpeckers. Hooded oriole. This is again a widespread Mexican species that just makes it into Arizona and California somewhat. A bird that some Albertans might be familiar with, the black-headed grosbeak, though they probably are resident there as well, or could well be a migrant, but coming to the feeders very regularly there. And this is the Arizona woodpecker, and if you notice, it's the dark part of this woodpecker is not black, but it is brown, so it's the only brown feathered woodpecker. And the Arizona name is a bit of a misnomer. If they want to change names, you should look at this one, because I think probably only a few % of its range is in Arizona. The bulk of its range is again in Mexico and Central America. But that was one of the target birds I wanted to see. I was really happy to see this one and gave us good views at the feeders here. A bridled titmouse, a chickadee-like bird, and again with just a little bit of its range coming into a little farther into Arizona and New Mexico. You can see them up at even Phoenix and north of Phoenix towards the Grand Canyon. One warbler I saw there, a black-throated gray warbler, which is a West Coast bird that you can see even up to Vancouver and Vancouver Island. This one probably a migrant. And the white-breasted nuthatch, and what I put the brackets interior west is what eBird calls these, and it probably is it is a subspecies of the white-breasted nuthatch. The visual differences are almost imperceptible, but the voice, and even I could tell it had a totally different call than the white-breasted nuthatches we have around here. So who knows, maybe it'll be another split someday. And then after our time at that lodge, we went to the Madeira Canyon. Here we're starting, this is about 5,500 feet, and you could take this trail right up to 10,000 feet high or something. I think we didn't go that far. We just went up for an hour or so. But one of the birds we were looking for there is this warbler called a painted redstart. And as it says in the bird books, it's found in mountain canyons along stream beds and boulders, exactly where we found one there. And like with the other redstart warblers, it flashes its wing, flashes its tail, never sits still. Hard to get a good photograph of it. And then after that, sort of long half day, my brother and I got the idea, let's go up to Mount Lemmon ourselves. And again, Mount Lemmon's just on the north side of Tucson. It's a beautiful road that takes you right to the top. It's windy, but it's smooth and well paved. So if anybody happens to be in Tucson, I could easily recommend a drive up to Mount Lemmon. And there's numerous places to stop on the road up where there's some good birding. Here's another yellow-eyed junco, because we're up into the pine oak habitat on the mountain. This one, a bit of a juvenile, with a little more stripes on the head and chest, and the eyes not as yellow as an adult bird. hermit warbler. It's sort of another West Coast warbler. I'd not seen one, so I was very happy to find one here up in the high on Mount Lemmon. It's probably a migrant. And then we're lucky enough to have a Grace's warbler just foraging very close to us. Managed to get some really good photos here. It's just picked a little spider off that clump of the tree right in front of its face there. And so again, this is a very typical bird of the pine oak habitat, really only found in that habitat at this kind of elevation. And very closely related to the yellow-throated warbler, sort of a Western equivalent of the yellow-throated warbler, which is a Eastern species, except for that one that showed up around Edmonton last month. And so we hadn't seen before was house wren. So again, probably some specific subspecies there, but they're not as identifiable as other birds. And then the last day of the festival, we went to what's called the Peyton Hummingbird Center. And this was, again, south of Tucson, very close to the Mexican border, but where the story was a couple named the Peytons bought this house and started putting up some hummingbird feeders and started seeing hummingbirds that hadn't been seen anywhere else around the area. And so they've left the house after they passed away to the Tucson Audubon Society, which owns this, the house and the land and runs the Peyton Center for Hummingbirds now. And this is kind of one of the key hummingbirds I have there, a spectacular violet-crowned hummingbird with that, I'll say again, that typical range that barely makes it into Arizona from Mexico and Central America. Striking violet head, orange bill, pure white throat. So I managed to get a nice picture of it on a natural perch. It's again one of the target birds that I was going for. And then there was a fellow there that set up a hummingbird photography setup for us and gave a lot of tips on photographing hummingbirds, which is obviously sort of a passion of his. So I forget his name, but he's part of the Tucson Audubon Society. So as you can see, he's got two flashes higher up shining on the feeder. The feeder, he's covered all the holes except one, so he knows which one the hummingbird would come to. And then he puts a background, either a plain green background or sort of a blurry foliage background with the lower flashes illuminating the background. And the trick with the flashes is that you can really freeze the motion of the hummingbird and you don't get the blurred wing effect. And the way he had this set up, your own flash, even just the flash on your camera would trigger these flashes. So you could just, he had a tripod or I had my own tripod. You just set up your own camera and use his setup, and worked out very well. And the kind of pictures you get there were like this. So where you really get very nice even illumination of the hummingbird, the wings pretty well stopped. You get the iridescence off the feathers really spectacularly. Again, a male broad-billed hummingbird. Another male. And lucky is able to get one. Often the way hummingbirds feed, they'll feed and then back up and hover. Not all of them, but most of them. So you could just wait till they sort of backed up and hovered a bit before they went in again and get some good shots. If you got one close enough that it caught some of the feeder, I suppose you could just retouch or Photoshop it out. There's a female broad-billed hummingbird. These are all my photos, believe it or not. Probably a black-chinned female hummingbird. a little more of a curve in the bill than the ruby-throated. I'm going to say a rufous hummingbird. And besides hummingbirds, even though it's a hummingbird center, it actually had a lot of other spectacular birds, a very natural little spot. Lesser goldfinches were really common. We've seen those in most of the other places we went to. They're pretty common in most sites there, as of course they're closely related to the American goldfinches we get around here. Western tanager was there. Lazuli bunting, and we'd seen these at some other sites as well, but didn't have as one of the few good photos I got of them. It's just hard to get a good picture of these ones. What's called a Buick's wren, a typical wren of the Southwest, California, Arizona. I always called it Bewick's, but then I was corrected down there. It's called, the pronunciation is Buick, like the car. And I guess that problem will be solved again when they get a new name for it, but it's a common neighborhood bird if you're in Arizona or California with a, once you know their call, you kind of realize they're everywhere. There's a couple special warblers down in this area. This one called a Lucy's warbler. Pretty plain Jane kind of warbler. I think this one might be a younger one. The adults might show a bit of a red on the head, like same like a kingbird or something, but the cinnamon orangish color rump that you see peeking out there is identifying mark. And so that was another one I was very pleased to find, a Lucy's warbler. And the other ones, the other warbler at this place was the yellow-breasted chat, and they were everywhere on this property. They're old, or obviously adults and younger ones, and they were foraging and feeding the young ones and singing. And I had not seen a yellow-breasted chat before in Alberta or anywhere, so I was very happy to see these and get some pretty good photos, I thought. There's another yellow-breasted chat with some food. Another one with a bunch of something ready to feed one of the youngsters that was around there. And a very unexpected bird was a Mississippi kite. Now, this is a raptor of the southeastern states. But there's, I guess you'd call it sort of a disjunctional range. There are some found in Southeast Arizona for some reason, and it's one of the few places you could see it in the western states. This is an adult male with the white head. So that was kind of a good unexpected tick on my list. And there's another picture of the kite. They were just overhead. We didn't see them perched anywhere, but at least able to get some shots. Okay. I think that's all I have for bird pictures. I see there's some